Alright, it's going to be a video on doing a brake job on a 2012 F-150. I've got a 5.0 XLT two-wheel drive, but it should be the same for all the other ones. Yeah, so let's get started. So I'll be doing rotors and pads today, front and back. I've already done the driver's side, did those last weekend, so today I'll be doing the passenger side, showing you how to do it. It's pretty easy, pretty simple, and pretty quick. So anybody should be able to do this as long as you have the parts and the tools. I'm going to go over that real quick. So as far as parts, you're going to need, if you're doing rotors, you need rotors and pads. I've got a kit from Power Stop that I'm using that I'll link below, but it comes with rotors for front and rear, comes with the pads, comes with this hardware that is recommended to replace little clips on the calipers, and also highly recommend this lubricant that comes with it to make sure your brakes don't make noises. As far as the tools go, of course we're going to need some way to lift the car up, take the wheel off, so I got a jack and also some wheel stops for safety. You need a tire iron to get the lugs off, or a wrench. A few sockets for the front. You're going to need 13 millimeter, and I believe this one a 13/16, and for the rear I think it's an 18 millimeter. And then again, I recommend using 3/8, and you probably need a ½ inch, maybe even a breaker bar to get some of the caliper bolts off. So that's what this is here, a ½ inch breaker bar, so you can get enough force to break loose some of the bolts. I've also got a torque wrench, so we can put everything back together according to the torque specs. Also, you're going to need some brake cleaner to make sure that you clean all the grease off of the new parts, and a clamp to get the old brake pads out, or at least to reset the caliper so you can put the new brake pads in. Would also recommend maybe some sort of a catch can for the brake fluid, so you'll see whenever we squeeze the brake calipers to get them ready for the new brake pads, it's going to expel a little bit of brake fluid. So this is useful. You can just use a cup if you don't have one of these, and you might need some other odd ends and tools like a plier and screwdriver, but maybe not. So again, I'll put a list of everything you'll need as far as parts and tools go in the description below. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure the car's in park, got the parking brake on, and I'm going to put the wheel chocks on the back wheel, since I'll be working on the front wheel first, and then jack it up. Okay, so I got my wheel chocks in the back for safety. This is where I put my jack. I got it on the frame behind the cross member. Then I got my jack stand ready to go in front of the cross member. That's the way I'm going to do it. Feel free to do it whatever way you think is safe. And what I've done so far is just jacked it up to where I've got most of the weight off the front tire, but the front tire is still touching. And so this way I can break loose the lug nuts without the tire spinning. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. Alright, now that we've got the wheel off and the truck safely supported on a jack stand, we can start working on getting the caliper off. So this is the caliper here. And this is a caliper bracket that holds a caliper to the assembly. So to get the caliper off, you got two bolts in the back here, one up here that goes to your caliper slide pin, and then one down here, and they both take 13 millimeter socket to take off. So I'll take this off first, and then once I get those bolts out, I'm going to take the caliper off. You got to be very careful not to stress this rubber brake line. So you don't want to bend it or twist it or let it hang from this brake line. So you'll see I'm going to pull it off, and I'll tuck it over here somewhere, set it down on this bar to where it's not hanging on the rubber hose or damaging the rubber hose at all. Okay, so I got the caliper back here in a safe spot. You could also put a bungee cord or something around here to make sure that it stays steady. If that slides off and falls, it could damage this brake cable, so it's very important that that's in a stable position. So now that the caliper's off, we can take off our brake pads. There's the outside and the inside. You can see, one thing I want to point out, the stock OEM brake pads, the inner pads came with these little ears, they call them, or ridges, that seat against the piston and the caliper. The new ones, you can see the inside and the outside are different. The new ones I got from Power Stop do not have the ears. And so I thought this was weird, but it comes with a piece of paper that says, hey, we know that we've changed the design. These are the correct ones. I even called Power Stop and talked to one of their technical guys, and he said, yes, these are the correct pads. So it's okay if you notice that difference, that your new ones will not have the ears. So once you get your caliper off, you should be able to get your brake pads off, and this might be a good time. You got a screwdriver, help wiggle those out some. Anyways, I'll get these out in time lapse, and we're also going to remove these clips. So you see here, each pad has a clip, one there, one here. Same thing on the inside, the clips. In our brake kit, we got new ones. So we're going to take these off, replace them. Just make sure that you pay attention to the orientation. The bigger part of the clip is on the outside. Same thing here, the bigger part of the clip is facing towards the inside of the truck. So we'll get those off next. Alright, so I got those off. If you're only doing your brake pads, you can skip ahead and pick up in a little bit. But I'm also going to redo my rotors. You can see I've got some cuts in my rotors. Also, when I brake, I can feel my truck kind of pulsate. So I think my rotors are warped. So I'm going to go ahead. That's why I got the rotor and pad kit. So to get the rotors off, the next thing I'm going to do is I need to take off the caliper bracket. And that's going to require me taking off these two big bolts. One up here, one down here. And those are going to take a 13/16 inch socket. And so I'll do that next. These are pretty hard to break. I think they've got like 180 foot-pounds on them. But I was able to do it with my 1/2 inch breaker bar. Just takes a good bit of force. If you've got an impact gun, impact wrench, that might be a good time to use it as well. Okay, got those off. A little out of breath. In my opinion, that's the hardest part of this whole job, is getting those two bolts off. There they are. They're big. They're hard. And you really got to get in there and yank on them. If you've got an impact wrench, great time to use them. That's about the limit of my strength, is getting those off. So if you're a somewhat healthy, middle-aged man, you should be able to get them off, hopefully, by hand. But if not, maybe try to use an impact tool. And I always like to coat my bolts with some WD-40 when I take them off, just to kind of clean them with junk. And so they'll be a little lubricated when they go back in, make it a little bit easier. Alright, now that that's done, now the rotor should be free to come loose. Sometimes it takes some convincing to come off. You can beat it with a rubber mallet if you have one. Sometimes it just seats on the hub a little bit. There it goes. Keep in mind, I live in Louisiana. We don't have road salt or rust, so these come off pretty easy compared to somebody living up north that has a lot of salt and rust on your trucks. Okay, so I hit my what is this, wheel hub, I guess, with some WD-40 and some sandpaper just to kind of clean up. Had a little bit of surface rust on there. It's optional. If yours is in bad shape or kind of rough, might want to do that. Yeah, it just kind of depends what yours looks like. So cleaned up that surface. Now I need to take my new rotor, open it up, and I'm going to spray it down with brake cleaner. So there's a brake parts cleaner, because they come with a coating of oil to protect it from rusting. You can see this one didn't do so great, but anyway. So I'm just going to spray where the brake pads sit, front and back, and get that oil off. And then I can go ahead and put it back on there and start putting this back together. Okay, so there's the new rotors. I just put a couple lug nuts on to keep the rotor on, because what usually keeps the rotor on is the caliper and the brake pads. So put a couple lug nuts on, keep it in place. So next I'm basically just going to put everything back together. I'm going to put the caliper bracket on first, using the same bolts that came out, and again those are going to be torqued to 181 foot-pounds, I believe. I'll put down on the bottom there what the torque value is in case it isn't 181. So I'll do that next. Alright, so the rotors are on now. Now we go back to working on the brake pads. One thing you want to check always is these slide pins here. These actually have a little rubber boot on them you can pop off. You can pull a slide pin out. Check to make sure you got grease there, and it's not dirty or rusted or anything like that. If you have brake grease, you can put more grease on them. Mine still look pretty good. Make sure that boot clips back on. Just make sure they go in and out nice and smooth, both of them. Definitely recommend though, if you got the grease for them, clean off the old grease, put new grease on it. It's always a good best practice. I don't have grease, so I'm not going to do it. Another thing I'll admit real quick is I couldn't get these to 180 foot-pounds, just not strong enough. So I just did it as tight as I could, and just gonna hope for the best there. All right, next thing is we're gonna put these clips back on. So got my new clips here for the brake pads. I got 4 of them. You remember what they look like. The big part of the clip faces away from the rotor. So on the outside, the big clip's going to go on the outside. On the inside, the big clip's going to go towards the inside. So I put those on next. They should just clip into place like that. Same thing inside, clip into place. That one doesn't want to stay. Happened to me on the other front wheel also. For some reason the top one over here didn't want to stay in place. So whatever, I'll put it in later. If you look at the grease packet, it tells you where all to grease or lubricate, I mean. And so you can see right here, it tells you to make sure the pins are lubricated, the caliper pins. You want to make sure that the ears, or basically these clips, are lubricated, and also contact places on the back of the brake pad are lubricated. So I'm going to put a little bit of lubricant on each of these clips, squeeze them out on my finger, rub it on here. Same thing back here. Just put it inside the clip because that's where the brake pads are gonna ride. You can see here's a clip. I'm just putting it all in here. Okay. And then we can slide the brake pads in. So Just make sure the curvature matches the rotor. Place them in there, push them against the rotor. Same thing for the back one. Again, need to make sure my clip is in place before I put the brake pad in. So I'm just gonna hold that one in place. Put my brake pad in, making sure it goes in the right way. Oops. Okay. There we go. Next we can move on to the caliper. So for the caliper, again, everything we do with the caliper, we want to make sure we're not stressing this brake line here, because it's just made out of rubber. It can break. No pun intended. Get stuck. So what we've got to do next is, you can see right now these pistons, these are what go push in and out when you press your brakes. Because the old brake pads were worn, these pistons are pushed out and they won't fit over the new brake pads. So you got to find a way to push these pistons out. And so what I like to do is first find a place where you can put this where it's not stressing the brake hose. Okay. Okay, there we go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my old brake pad, my inner one that has the ears. See those ears that cover these circles? I'm going to place it here, and I'm going to take a clamp. Here I've got a 6-inch C-clamp, and I'm going to use this to squeeze these pistons back in. So, tricky part is just doing all this again without risking any damage to the rubber brake hose. That is the biggest thing to worry about. You don't want this to drop and dangle by the rubber brake hose because you could damage it. Again, if you want to get a bungee cord or a zip tie or something to hold this in place, highly recommend that. Okay, so that's kind of snug right now. Now, one other thing I did read online is that every other car I've ever done brake jobs, I just do this no problem. But when I read some stuff on forums about this truck, it says that if you do this, it could force the brake fluid back into the ABS module, the anti-lock brake system, and damage it. And so they recommended opening the bleed valve, which is this thing right here. Take off this little rubber head. There's a little nipple right there. If you crack this open with a wrench, when you crank down on this, instead of the fluid going back into the brake system, it'll just squirt out of here. So instead of pressuring up the brake system internally, it just releases the pressure here. So I'm going to do that here just to make sure. I don't know if this is true or not, but just to make sure I don't damage anything. I'm going to crack this open with a little wrench right here and clamp down on this until this pushes all the way in, and then I'll be able to put the caliper back on. Alright, somehow I managed to strip the bolt on my brake bleeder, which really sucks. I don't know how I did that. So I'm not going to open my brake bleeder. I don't know how that happened. So anyways, if you can open yours, open your brake bleeder, and then use a clamp to slowly push your piston back in like this. So you can see that this is starting to push back in. Hopefully I'm not destroying my anti-lock braking system. Okay. Get that pushed in. Release that. Take off the old brake pad. Then we're going to want to add some more lubricant to wherever the caliper is going to contact the brake pad. So in this case, I'm going to add lubricant to these circular pistons here, and then also these areas on the other side of the caliper that are going to touch the brake pad. Okay. Now, making sure we're not twisting the brake hose, again, making sure it's in the orientation it wants to be in. Should be able to slide your caliper on. Okay. Looks like I need to squeeze mine a little bit more in order to get to fit. Okay. Put a little more clamping force on it. Squeeze them in all the way. Okay. Alright, now it goes on easy. You might have to push these little slide pins in a little bit to get it to go in. Just put our bolts back in by hand. Everything always by hand first to make sure nothing's cross-threaded. Okay. And tighten those back up. I'll look up a torque value. It's probably something pretty light. I'm just gonna, snug it up by hand because I only took a little bit of hand force to get them off. But I'll look up the torque value and put it in the description or put it in the video in case you want to torque it. If you took off your bleeder cap, put that back on. That's it. Just put your wheel on and then we can move to the back. Okay, so the rear is going to be pretty much exactly the same as the front, just a little bit smaller caliper. I think one of the bolts is a different size. But yeah, so start off with jacking it up. I'm going off of the axle and putting my jack stand underneath the leaf bracket. I think that's what that is. But I'm going to do the same thing. Took the weight off a little bit, break the nuts loose, jack it up, take the wheel off, and I'll go through the rear a little bit faster since it's, again, just kind of the same thing we did for the front. So again, same process. Take off the caliper bolts, take off the caliper bracket bolts, get all that off. Only difference is for the caliper bracket, you need a 18mm socket. And then once you get that off, then the old rotor should come off like that. Same thing, if you want to clean up the surface, you can. But yeah, at this point, just put it all back together. That might be the hardest part of the whole thing, is getting these stupid clips on. Maybe when the caliper bracket is off is the best time to put these clips on. Make it a little bit easier, because that was very difficult to do by hand. But anyways, moving along. Instead of greasing the inside of these clips, which is going to be hard with the lubricant, I'm just going to grease the ears, the outside ears here, I think, and the inside, just all around of the brake pads, because they can't get into these crevices here. Oops. All right, that's it. Again, just make sure you're lubricating where the caliper contacts the pads, and just going to put the wheel back on, and then I'll talk about the last important step, which is bedding the brakes, basically breaking them in. There's a procedure you have to do once you start driving again with new brakes. So I'll talk about that in a second.